Hey there, horror fans. Before we dive into tonight's terrifying tales, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Tonight, I'm sharing 3 absolutely true stories from people who lived right next door to abandoned houses. These aren't urban legends or made-up creepypastas. These are real experiences that changed these people forever. So dim the lights, check that your doors are locked, and let's begin. And fair warning, you might want to take a good long look at that empty house on your street after hearing these stories. The Watcher in the Window. When Amy and her husband bought their first home in a quiet suburb of Cleveland, they thought they'd found the perfect place to start a family. The house was affordable because it sat next to a rundown Victorian that had been empty for years. The real estate agent assured them the abandoned property would eventually sell, and anyway, wasn't it better than having noisy neighbors? For the first few months, Amy barely noticed the old house. Yes, it was an eyesore with its peeling paint and overgrown yard, but it was just part of the background. That changed one night in October when Amy was up late working on her laptop. It was almost midnight when movement caught her eye. She glanced out her bedroom window, which faced directly toward the abandoned house. A light was on in the upper window, a soft yellow glow that hadn't been there before. Amy froze, staring at the light. It was impossible. The house had no electricity. As she watched, a figure moved in front of the light. Just a shadow at first, then clearer. The outline of a person standing perfectly still, looking out the window. Looking directly at Amy's window, looking at her. Amy jerked away from the window, her heart racing. She woke her husband, who reluctantly got up to check. By the time they looked again, the light was gone. Her husband suggested it was probably just kids breaking in, or maybe a homeless person seeking shelter. He promised to call the police in the morning. Amy tried to believe that explanation, but something felt wrong. The figure had been so still, so deliberate in its watching. And how had they created that light without electricity? The next morning, her husband called the police, who did a quick sweep of the abandoned house. They found no signs of break-in, no candles or flashlights, and no evidence anyone had been inside. The dust on the floors was undisturbed. The house was completely sealed. Amy tried to forget about it, but 3 nights later, she saw the light again. And the figure, this time it raised its hand slowly and pressed it against the glass, as if reaching out toward her. Amy screamed, waking her husband, but once again, by the time he looked, the window was dark. This pattern continued for weeks. Amy would see the figure, always standing in the same spot, always watching her window, sometimes pressing its hand against the glass. She began keeping her curtains closed and avoided looking at the abandoned house. She had trouble sleeping and jumped at every sound. Her husband suggested they install security cameras. They set one up, pointing at the abandoned house, hoping to catch whoever was trespassing. After a particularly bad night when Amy saw the figure in not just 1, but 3 different windows, they checked the camera footage. What they saw made no sense. The video showed the abandoned house sitting dark and empty all night. No lights, no movement. Nothing. But that wasn't the worst part. When they reviewed footage from the camera pointing at their own house, they saw something that made Amy's blood run cold. At exactly 3:17 a.m., a dark figure walked slowly across their yard, coming from the abandoned house. It stopped directly beneath their bedroom window, looking up for several long minutes. Then it placed both hands against the wall of their home and began to climb, moving unnaturally like an insect up the brick exterior toward their window. The footage ended abruptly in static just as the figure reached their bedroom windowsill. They called the police again, who did a more thorough investigation of the abandoned house. In the attic, they found something disturbing: old photographs of Amy and her husband, taken before they had even bought their home. Pictures of them shopping, walking their dog, sitting in restaurants, and a small makeshift bed positioned right by the window with a perfect view into their bedroom. The police never found who was responsible. Amy and her husband sold their home the following month, taking a significant financial loss just to get away. But the strangest part, The new owners reported no problems. No lights, no watching figure. Nothing unusual at all, until Amy drove by one day and happened to glance up at the abandoned house. For just a moment, she saw a familiar silhouette in the upper window. Only this time, it wasn't looking at her old house. It was watching her car as she drove away. If you're enjoying these true horror stories, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And we've got 2 more terrifying tales coming right up. The basement door. Mike never minded the abandoned house next door to his rental. It was just an old farmhouse that had been empty since its elderly owner died without heirs. The property was tied up in legal disputes, so it sat rotting away year after year. Mike actually liked having no neighbors on one side. He worked nights as a nurse and slept during the day, so the quiet was perfect. The only odd thing was that his landlord had been very specific about one rule. Never use the door in his basement that connected to the abandoned house's cellar. When Mike asked about it, his landlord explained that the houses had once belonged to the same family. They had connected the basements decades ago, but sealed off the door when the properties were split. It was just an old wooden door with a deadbolt, nothing special, but Mike's landlord made him promise never to open it or even unlock it. Mike agreed, though he rarely went into his basement anyway. It was just a concrete space for storage and laundry. But after living in the house for 6 months, Mike began noticing strange things. First, it was just sounds, scratching noises coming from behind the walls. He assumed it was mice and set traps, but caught nothing. Then his belongings started appearing in different places than where he left them. His keys on the kitchen counter instead of the hook by the door. His shoes in the living room when he was sure he'd left them by the front entrance. One morning, after a particularly long shift, Mike came home to find all the faucets in his house running full blast. Every single one. The kitchen, both bathrooms, even the outdoor spigot. He was sure he hadn't left them on. That night, unable to sleep despite his exhaustion, Mike heard a new sound. A soft tapping coming from the basement. Tap, tap, tap. Then silence. Then tap, tap, tap again. Rhythmic and deliberate. Against his better judgment, Mike went downstairs to investigate. The basement was dark, except for the small window wells letting in the gray morning light. The tapping had stopped. Mike checked around the water heater, the washer and dryer, looking for any loose pipes or signs of animals. Then he heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the sealed door, the door that led to the abandoned house next door. Mike approached slowly, his heart pounding. There was no mistake. Someone was gently knocking from the other side. "Hello?" Mike called, instantly regretting breaking the silence. The tapping stopped. For a long, terrible moment, there was nothing. Then came a sound that turned Mike's blood to ice, the soft slide of the deadbolt on the other side of the door being unlocked. Mike backed away as the doorknob began to turn slowly. It wasn't possible. That door had been sealed for years. There was no way anyone could be on the other side. The door opened just a crack, and a terrible smell rushed into the basement, the stench of rot and decay. Through the crack, Mike could see nothing but darkness. Then a voice spoke, raspy, wet, like someone whose throat was filled with fluid. "I've been waiting for you to invite me in," it whispered. "So polite of you to finally say hello." Mike ran upstairs, grabbed his phone and car keys, and drove away. From his car, he called the police, who agreed to check both houses. When they arrived, they found the connecting door in the basement still sealed shut, with decades of dust on the deadbolt. It clearly hadn't been opened in years. When Mike insisted they broke through to investigate the abandoned house, they found no signs of anyone living there. No food, no belongings, nothing disturbed. It was completely empty except for one thing. In the cellar, directly opposite Mike's door, someone had arranged all of Mike's missing items neatly on the floor. Keys, shoes, clothing, even his toothbrush. And on the wall, written in fresh mud, were the words, "See you soon, neighbor." Mike never returned to the house. He sent friends to collect his essential belongings and broke his lease. His landlord didn't argue or ask for additional payment. 3 months later, Mike saw a news report that the abandoned house had burned to the ground in an electrical fire. Strange for a house with no electricity. Even stranger was what firefighters found in the cellar. The charred remains of what appeared to be a bed and a living space, and dozens of photographs of Mike sleeping, eating, and moving around his house. The fire investigators concluded someone had been living in the abandoned house for years, watching Mike through cracks in the walls and floors. But they never found out who it was or where they went after the fire. To this day, Mike checks every closet and crawl space in any place he stays, and he never, ever responds if he hears tapping in the night. If these stories are keeping you up at night, you're not alone. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever lived next to an abandoned building? Let me know, and don't forget to subscribe for more true horror stories. Now, let's move on to our final and most terrifying tale. What lives there? Now, Sarah and her wife Jamie moved into their charming suburban home 5 years ago. The house next door had been abandoned even then, a once beautiful Cape Cod that had fallen into disrepair after its owners lost it to foreclosure during the financial crisis. Unlike most abandoned properties, though, no bank ever seemed to claim it, and no for sale sign ever appeared. The neighborhood kids said it was haunted, but Sarah and Jamie didn't believe in ghosts. The only thing that bothered them was having to look at the eyesore next door with its sagging roof and boarded-up windows. They even considered trying to buy it themselves just to fix it up, but they could never figure out who actually owned it. Their concerns about the house changed the day they decided to adopt a dog. They brought home Max, a gentle shepherd mix from the local shelter. He was perfect, well-behaved, loving, and protective. But from the very first day, Max refused to go into their backyard if they let him off leash. He would stand at the door, whining and backing away. If they forced him out on his leash, he would pull desperately toward the house, never getting close to the fence they shared with the abandoned property. At night, they would sometimes find him sitting in the hallway, staring at the wall they shared with the empty house, growling softly. 3 months after adopting Max, Sarah noticed something strange while gardening in their backyard. Fresh footprints in the mud along the fence, going from the abandoned house to their yard and back. Too small to be an adult's, they looked like a child's bare feet. She mentioned it to Jamie, who suggested it was probably neighborhood kids using the abandoned lot as a shortcut. Sarah wasn't so sure. There was something odd about the depth of the prints, as if whatever made them was much heavier than a child should be. That night, they were awakened by Max barking furiously at their bedroom window, the one facing the abandoned house. Sarah got up to check and saw a light moving inside the empty building. Just a faint glow like a candle or flashlight passing by windows on the second floor. Jamie called the police, who did a thorough search of the abandoned house. They found evidence that someone had been inside. Food wrappers, a makeshift bathroom set up in a back room, and strangest of all, dozens of children's drawings pinned to the walls of what had once been the master bedroom. The drawings showed the same two figures over and over. Tall, unnaturally thin beings with 2 long arms and no faces. The police increased patrols in the area but found no further evidence of trespassing. Sarah and Jamie installed security cameras around their property, including ones pointing at the abandoned house. For several weeks, nothing unusual happened. Max still refused to go in the yard alone, but they had gotten used to his quirk. Then one night, while reviewing footage from their security cameras, Sarah noticed something that made her stomach drop. The camera pointing at the abandoned house had captured a face peering out from a second-floor window. A pale, gaunt face with huge black eyes, watching their home. It was there for just a single frame, then gone. Sarah showed Jamie, who insisted it was just a trick of the light or a reflection. Sarah wasn't convinced but tried to put it out of her mind. A week later, they woke to find Max missing from their bedroom where he usually slept. They searched the house, calling his name, growing increasingly worried. Finally, they found him in their attic, a space they rarely used. He was standing rigid, facing the wall that bordered the abandoned house, growling deep in his throat. Sarah approached him slowly, trying to coax him away. As she got closer, she heard it. A soft scratching sound coming from inside the wall. Tap, scratch, tap. Pause. Tap, scratch, tap. Almost like Morse code. Jamie wanted to call the police again, but what would they say? That their dog was growling at a wall? That they heard scratching? It wasn't enough. Instead, they decided to set up a camera in the attic, trained on that wall, to see if they could capture whatever was making the noise. The next morning, they reviewed the footage. For hours, nothing happened. Then, at exactly 3:33 a.m., the scratching began again. As they watched in horror, the wall seemed to bulge slightly, as if something was pressing against it from the other side. The bulge moved slowly across the wall, following the same path as the scratching sound. Then their attic light flickered, and when it steadied again, there was a dark stain spreading on their wall, a damp patch that grew as they watched. The camera caught the moment when something pushed through. Not a hand, not any recognizable body part, but a long black segmented appendage that probed the air of their attic before retreating back through the wall. Max had gone berserk when this happened, barking and lunging at the wall, but somehow they had slept through it all. They immediately called a contractor to inspect their attic wall. The man seemed confused when he found the wall completely dry with no signs of water damage or holes. When they showed him the video, he looked uncomfortable and suggested that maybe their camera was malfunctioning. But Sarah and Jamie knew what they had seen. They started sleeping downstairs as far from the shared wall as possible. They considered moving but had just refinanced their mortgage and couldn't afford to sell so soon. One night, Jamie woke to find Max standing at the foot of their makeshift bed in the living room, hackles raised, staring at the ceiling. Sarah was still asleep. Jamie followed Max's gaze but saw nothing unusual. Then she noticed wet spots on the floor, a trail of dark liquid dripping from above. Looking up, Jamie saw the stains spreading across their living room ceiling, following the same path from their bedroom, down the hallway and now directly above them. Whatever was in the abandoned house was tracking them through their own home. As Jamie watched, frozen in fear, the ceiling bulged downward. The dark liquid, not water, too thick, too dark, began dripping faster. Something was pressing down, stretching the drywall to its breaking point. Jamie grabbed Sarah and Max, rushing them out of the house and into their car. As they pulled away, Jamie looked back at their home. In the upstairs window, their bedroom window, she saw something moving. Not a person, not an animal. Something that seemed to shift and change shape as it pressed against the glass, leaving dark smears as it explored the barrier separating it from the outside world. They never went back. They abandoned everything they owned, defaulted on their mortgage, and moved across the country. Sometimes Sarah checks their old address online, wondering if someone new has moved in. Most recent Street View shows both houses standing empty, with no trespassing signs posted by the county. But satellite images tell a different story. From above, you can see that the roof of the abandoned house has collapsed inward, creating a gaping hole. Something dark seems to be growing from that hole, spreading slowly across the roof of Sarah and Jamie's old home, connecting the two houses like a bridge. Or maybe, if you look closely, more like a mouth, gradually consuming everything in its path. So the next time you walk past that abandoned house on your street, the one with the boarded up windows and overgrown yard, ask yourself, is it really empty? Or is something living there watching you, waiting for the perfect moment to introduce itself? Thank you for listening to these true horror stories. If you enjoyed them, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more terrifying tales every week. Turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. And please share your own experiences in the comments below. Have you ever lived next to an abandoned house? What strange things did you notice? Remember to check on your neighbors. And always pay attention when your pets try to warn you about something. They might be sensing what you can't see. Sleep well, friends. I'll be back with more true horror stories next week, if you're brave enough to listen.